I was I was up at Minnetonka. Sure I was. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about.
Plymouth.
I was up at Plymouth yesterday, and everybody said, what's going down with Brexit? So I
Yeah.
carved a bit off the beginning of class to try and update people. At the beginning of the year, January of 2020, the United Kingdom officially was withdrawn from the European Union. Okay. But in that withdrawal, there was a year of negotiations to take care of misunderstandings, to negotiate differences, to take care of things that didn't get taken care of. And they said, we'll act as if. And what has happened in the next year when all of this negotiation was supposed to take place is that Boris and his cronies didn't feel like negotiating. The EU felt, and a couple of them have said, we felt like they were going to wait until the last minute and then make us take it or leave it. And so they didn't want to get pushed into that type of a situation. Well, the bottom line is nothing got negotiated, nothing got done. So now we've got, what is it, tomorrow or tonight or something, where there is not a legal deadline, but a physical deadline that even if things were passed, negotiated, excuse me, let's use the right words, even if things were negotiated, that document couldn't be carried back through the system, the British Parliament, in time to have it ratified before the 31st of December. Okay?
Yeah.
So they set, I think it's tonight, they set as the drop dead point. In other words, nothing happens by midnight tonight. We're walking home. And it will be what's called a hard Brexit. Now, had they negotiated something, had they figured out how to, there would have been a soft Brexit. So those are the two terms. The 3 points that I've been managing to pick up that people are willing to talk about. One, a big issue is still fishing. And fishing comes down to where can I fish for what? Under the EU, there were specific fish that a country could fish for. In other words, Norway could fish for cod. Scotland could fish for sardines. And no crossing over. That meant they had set areas. The attitude now is that, well, since there is no agreement, I can fish for anything I want, anywhere I want. And the EU is saying, no, you cannot come into our land. You cannot come into our water. You cannot fish for. And so Britain and they're blaming it on Scotland, but they're saying that Scotland needs unrestricted fishing anywhere in the world. And the EU is saying, not in our waters. You don't have an agreement to fish in our waters. Well, so that's still up there, so to speak. Another one that Boris is having trouble with deals, again, with Northern Ireland and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and that border running across there.
Mm-hmm.
The EU language says that there's a border, there will be customs. which is the whole point of the EU, because if you're a member of the EU, there's no border, therefore there's no customs, and there's free trade. But if you go from Northern Ireland, which is no longer in the EU, to Southern Ireland,
which is EU,
you're going across an international border.
oh,
Now that, if that border is reestablished, is in violation of the Friday Agreement, which the Good Friday Agreement, which was the thing that calmed down the riots and the fires and the bombings in Belfast. And there was this agreement called the Good Friday Agreement that there would never be a hard border across there. Well, now the EU is saying we want a hard border. Republic of Ireland is staying moot, and England is saying, well, we really don't want a border in there. We'd rather keep peace. But the EU is saying we want a border. So that's number two. And then number three, because of that, what happens if the EU passes a law dealing with pollution or something, which would affect the operating plant in Northern Ireland? In other words, if a plant in Northern Ireland were generating pollution and we're drifting into Southern Ireland, what are the ramifications? You see, if they're both in the EU, they get together and they negotiate it and they take care of it. But now the Republic and Northern Ireland are not. Do they end up going to the World Court? Well, it could have been negotiated. Those three issues could have been negotiated. There would have been peace in the valley, et cetera, et cetera. But it ain't happening. It didn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. And so we got this mess. And you got Boris kind of like a little kid. I watched him the other night. And he's up against a woman who is just as stubborn as he is. And so they're both standing there, stomping their foot, sucking their thumb, saying, "Oh, you're taking advantage of me." Now, I understand the EU position. Yes, you're not going to negotiate. You're going to wait until the last minute, and then we're going to all give in because we want an agreement rather than no agreement. Yeah. She's not going to give on that. Well, that's not the issues. The issues are the law changed the fishing in Northern Ireland, but she's hung up on something way over here. Boris is the same way. Boris isn't talking about these issues. He's saying, you won't negotiate with me, so I won't negotiate with you. And I'm going to go. And he was last night, he had this great dinner. He and all of his cronies were there, but nobody from the other side was invited. And that was in Belgium. And the other delegation was across town, if that much, down the street maybe. But why couldn't they get together? Why couldn't you do it? Why is it us versus them? And it's a versus. It's not an us and them, it's an us versus them. So it's an ugly thing. And I listened to McConnell today on the tube, and McConnell's doing the same thing. We're not going to negotiate. Well, these people that are in dire straits because of COVID, they need the money. Yeah, but you're not doing it the way we want to do it. Therefore, we're not negotiating on the body. We're not negotiating on the dollar amount. We're not negotiating on any of that because some procedural step isn't being followed. And it comes down to what is more important. Come on now. What's more important, a procedural step or the financial well-being of millions of people? Well, I know where my biases are at, and I know that I can overlook a procedural step because I overlooked a ton of them if it got us to a positive ending. I guess I'm old-fashioned. I guess I don't, my values are passé. But I'll leave it at that, I guess. That's all I can say. I don't know. Do I see any hope? Not really. I see this going hard, and then after, I don't know, after maybe a month or two, I see somebody invading the other and testing the law, and I see a mess. I really do. I see a mess. What I do see, however, and I've said it before, so I don't think it's anything new. I do see Scotland exercising their right for another vote of independence. They were given permission for one more. The last one was 51-49. I think this is going to push it. When you look at what a no Brexit is going to mean, right now, there's like a 5-mile backup of trucks waiting to get into the channel to come up on the other side. Well, what's on those trucks? Well, vegetables, food. Great Britain, and it doesn't matter which area you're looking at, cannot support itself food-wise. Too many rocks, too many all kinds of stuff. But Great Britain cannot support itself, nor can Ireland. So they import. That was the reason for the empire. Britain brought in lamb from New Zealand and cattle from Australia. Britain bought all dairy from New Zealand. That was what all of the convoys all the way through World War II. That's what that was all about. Keep the United Kingdom from starvation. Well, if there are no trade agreements in place, then the food can't come in. So none of the food in Europe can come in to the island of Britannia. Now, yeah, we can laugh and we can say, well, that cuts off the wine, but it cuts off the tomatoes, it cuts off the lettuce, it cuts off, and it's up to other countries, and be careful, because a lot, not all, but a lot of the Commonwealth surrendered its trade rights when England joined, when Great Britain joined the EU. They had to dissolve a lot, not all, but most of their trade agreements. So it's not like next week we can start up trading with Canada and we're going to bring in enough meat and take care of everybody on the island. It just doesn't happen that fast. So I think they're looking at hard times for a while. The companies are trying to push stuff literally through the tunnel as fast as they can to get it to the other side before December 31st. Because the stuff that's in England that's been manufactured, they want it in France so they can sell it. And the food that's in France or Belgium or anywhere for that, Spain for that matter, they want it in England so that it can be sold. Because if December 31st gets here, it can't be imported. There's no trade agreement. So I think bangers and mash are going to be scarce, if you understand what I'm saying. And yes, I do think the cost of living is going to increase. I think it's going to go up sharply there. yes, I have a vested interest. I got a son and his wife over there, so yeah, I watch it close. But anywho, I wanted Navy. I'm looking at my audience here, and I know Chuck is out there. I see his right ear, and therefore I know he has a split personality. But I think a lot of other people, the British Navy is one of those topics that's just sort of out there floating around. So what I want to do is take a little bit of time, and I love this, so I'm going to share it with you. This, let's see, there it is. That is an Englishman in a coracle. Now that coracle is design and style and all that stuff. That's going to date back all the way to the Celts. That's made of woven reeds with a skin stretched over it, big enough for one person with a flat stick. Now, it didn't stay that way because coracles can be made bigger. But notice how far they are above the water. In other words, if you have a lot of waves, you have a lot of wetness, and you have water in the coracle, and the coracle will sink. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and make these A, bigger, and B, we're going to try and make them more waterproof. Now, in doing that, the next major step, if you will, was when, was when the Greeks, actually the Phoenicians, all right, those people who lived in around Syria, they started changing that. Now, they realized that they had to deepen the boat. They had a bigger draft, it's called. And the Greeks started putting out something that looked more like this. They put a ram on the front of them. These now became military. So this is the Greek Navy. That's a metal ram. And the oars along the side here, the oars would stick and they would ram the other boat. Now, if you are a fan of Ben-Hur, this is what the Romans copied. This is the Greek design, but this is also what the Romans copied. And they would ram the other boat with the oars. That's the only power they had. They eventually got around to putting a sail on the Roman ones. And the Greeks didn't use the sail very much, but the Romans improved it by putting a sail on it so that as they were going from place to place, at least the slaves didn't die. All right. So now what history-wise, here. Got to organize my pictures better. I like this because it's got a nice picture of the inside of a coracle. You see how it's woven? Okay, so that's our coracle. The next major step then is to take that Greek and modify it just a little bit. And all of a sudden, we get what's called the longboat or the long ship. And if you look at the difference, it's hard because this does begin to look like the Greek. I mean, it's got the dragon head coming up instead of going out, yeah. But you still got the same situation here with not much room between the water and the people getting wet. And this one doesn't have the oars jutting out, but this one does. Okay. Well, that's what was in practice, that type of thing, up until. And we have to look at where we were last time. And we were looking at Sir Francis Drake. Now, Drake is, given credit and circumnavigated the globe. Okay. But Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, Hind, which means deer, or stag, looked something like this. Now, notice there is still a similarity here. We've still got this low piece in here. We got a high bow, a high stern, but we've got more clearance in the middle. But when they raised it, what they did is they put in the gun ports. They put in the gun ports along here, and this Golden Hind has two decks, a set of gun ports down here and another one right on top of it. So, and of course, on the other side, you'd have two more. So this is the Golden Hind. Now, the Hind was rebuilt. And if you want to tour it, all you got to do is come up with some American money. They'll be very happy to take your money and let you tour it. So there is the Hind as it sits in a museum today. And notice something odd about the Golden Hind. It's distinctive. Look at how narrow it is across the back. Look how narrow it is all the way from front to back. Look how narrow that boat is. It's not going to have much resistance. The theory at this time was when you run up the sail, you don't want to push water to the side. You want to cut through it. And so this is then, as I say, this is Drake's ship. Now, we're going to have to jump. We've got to jump in order to get up to where those ships would be today, or for today's lesson, if you will. We got to jump because what we're going to do is we're going to get up to someone else that is rather famous. His name is Nelson. They kind of made a god out of Nelson. He is the on paper he's the leader. Okay. Now there's not under wind, under sail, there's not a lot of control. The wind doesn't blow, you don't move. Okay. So under the situation, Nelson can issue all kinds of orders, but it's up to the individual commanders, captains of the ship to make the ship go where you want it to. Okay. Now, the Spaniards and the Armada had a theory that, well, let's just say had a hole in it. And so when Nelson sat down with his cronies, he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to redesign naval warfare. What the Spaniards anticipated
Terry, I think we just lost your audio. You can hear me.
He muted it.
Is that better?
There, you got it. You got
All
it.
right. How did I mute it? Oh, I must have hit the thingy. All right. Well, we'll try this instead then. That's the ship with a line. That's the way the Spaniards would line up, anticipating a line like this on the British side. And that would mean that we have two lines, one coming north-south, the other one going south-north. And as they passed each other, they would shake hands. Yeah, with gunpowder. And in doing so, a lot of damage to one side of the ship or a lot of damage to the other side. And all these creative things happen, like, oh, let's take two cannonballs and let's put some chain in between them. And that when we fire them, we'll fire high. And these two cannonballs will start whipping around like this. And they'll go through the sails and they'll go through the rigging and they'll take the masts out and the ship won't be able to move. Well, with a ship with a line, if you've got one ship that can't move, the whole line can't move. You got a problem. Nelson said, I see that. We're going to do something different. And Nelson took his ships and he lined them up in what you and I would call a T. The Spanish were lined up this way, thinking, oh, we're going to go just down the line. Ship of the line. That's what we know. There it is. There they are, all in the line. Nelson said, no. We're going to go in a three-prong attack or five-prong attack or however many prongs we've got. Actually, it ended up being about 8. But this attack is going to come at it sideways. We're going to come at it at right angles. And our guns, when we go through the line, will shoot down the length of the Spanish ships, from the front to the back. And on the other side, we'll shoot from the back to the front. And what we're going to do is we're going to crash the line in multiple places. So like a fork, we're going to crash that line. And as we go through, we'll destroy the ships on both sides of us. And we can do that because at the back of the Spanish ships, there's just windows. There's no guns. So the British ships went through and they raked, R-A-K-E-D, they raked the Spanish galleons. And let's see, here is one of those Spanish galleons. Again, narrow back here, but it's all glass. Look, they got windows here, they got windows here, they're out for a picnic. They're going to have a good time. The admiral has a cabin back here, which, yeah, well, but when you hit back here, you also take out the rudder. When you hit back here, you take out all of the steering mechanism. And Drake figured it out. He said, oh, great, let's do it. They did it. And when those wounded ships, when those wounded ships got north into Scotland and the storms hit them, they had no steering. It was all damaged. It was the ropes were halfly frayed or cut or whatever. But the ships had no steerage. They couldn't go left. They couldn't go right. Now, let's not paint here. Let's not paint Nelson too nice, okay? Because this is Nelson's ship. Here we go. You want to count the number of gun ports on one side and then multiply by 2? When that went through the line, when that went through here, that did an awful lot of damage. And as this was part of the Napoleonic War. When you wipe, Spain and France were united. When this happened, when this went through, when this crossing of the T, when this occurs, then Nelson has what is considered a great naval victory. Well, let's just say the Spanish woke up. The next major step followed almost immediately because we don't need, come here, we don't need all these gun ports. We don't need all that extra weight that we're carrying with all those cannon, with all those cannonballs, with all of that gunpowder. We don't need it. What we do need is cargo. And we need that cargo so that we can come back from India loaded with tea. Why? Because tea has been introduced into England's diet, and of course it just erupted. Not only that, but what started this whole thing in the first place? The Spice Islands? Yeah. So the Spice Islands are still up here, and it's just beyond India. It's Singapore, it's Hong Kong, and I forgot. We found gold and diamonds in South Africa. So we got to get there and get back quick. And so the style of the ship changes from a round bow with gun ports to a pointy bow, no gun ports, and a lower profile. In other words, it doesn't stick as far above the water. But look, flat. Where did that? Yeah. Okay. That's anything but flat. That's anything but flat. These are the clipper ships. These were built for speed. An extra mast at the back, a flat deck, and a different bow. A different, here, get my fingers out of the way. A different bow. Not this fat, pudgy-cheeked one here, but this one where these are actually carved in. That's the ship that's going to cut days. Well, maybe a week off the time that it would take to get from South Africa back to Southampton. Look at all that canvas. And not just center sails, but outriggers. We've got sails on the outside of the mainsails. We got a second set of sails out here and another set out here outside of the mains. And then we got them here, and then we got them at the back, and this thing was made for speed. I like this because it shows this is an American clipper ship. Oops, here. This is an American clipper ship, but look at its style. It's got that cutting bow. It's got and this is our, if you will, this is what we knew from the end of the Revolutionary War and a lot of the American Civil War, because these were the blockade runners. These were the ones that got back and forth from England to the United States with goods so that the southern states had at least some economy. They put the cotton on here in the hold, and they got the cotton to England so that England could mill it, turn it into fabric, and sell it. Okay. All right. Now, that means, I got paper all over the place. That's what it means. It means that, here we go. That means that we've got this situation. We've got ships changing. We've got new thoughts in terms of what we should do. We got new times in terms of commuting from A to B. We've got the Battle of Trafalgar, which says, oh, nobody can stand up to the Brits. It's just been proven. And some people dared, because of the storm, some people even dared to say God is on our side. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, so I'll mention it and then we'll have it over with. The Armada crashing around the tip of Scotland and the northern part of Ireland. That is the reason that there are a lot of Spanish names. Somebody asked, I don't know where it was, that they asked about, yes. You asked about the Black Irish. And yes, this is where that's going to come from. Okay. Now, I resort to my, here we go. All right. Mentioned to you before, and it's funny how history is going to loop back on itself, but that's exactly what we've got. We've got a situation today where we're looking at Britain, the UK, we're looking at the UK's inability to feed its own people because they can't get enough trucks through the channel. Oh, they can fly it in, but boy, that has an effect on the price. And unless you have got a place to buy from legally, you don't have access. Well, that is the whole point of the British Navy. When you look at Britain as a whole, the United Kingdom as a package, no area can support itself. Wales does a beautiful job of raising rocks. Scotland does a beautiful job with purple mountains and a little bit of lavender and goats. And what did they do with the farmland in England? Oh, they dug it up and they built some mills and they put in some cotton and they put in some steel and they went to manufacturing. They forgot about agriculture. Part of it was arrogance. Part of it was the British attitude toward Ireland that says, well, we're just going to go over to Ireland and we're going to take any potatoes that we want. And they did. But then they went to Canada and they said, well, ship us some wheat so we can make flour. And then they went to South Africa and they said, we need barley for beer. And they went to India and they said, give us some rice and give us some tea. And it became so ingrained in the people that they just expected it. And all of a sudden we're looking at, oh, you can't get that from them anymore. It is the British Navy that steps in. The British Navy in and of itself doesn't transport any goods. That's why the flags are different. There is a white flag with a red cross in the middle and the Union Jack in the corner. That is Admiralty. In other words, that's the Navy's flag. The same flag, red with St. George's Cross and the Union Jack cut in the corner, is the Merchant Marines flag. So from a distance, you can look at the ship and you can know whether it's a military ship or whether it is a supply ship, one or the other. Okay. It is the supply ship that needs the protection. It is the supply ship that, yes, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Mm-hmm. But at this same time, we've got a lot of other stuff going on. I mean, look at what Drake did. Drake was a pirate, privateer. You make up a new word just, to justify the fact that he's, well. But what we're doing is we're taking money in the form of wheat, in the form of gold, in the form of potatoes, in the form of Spanish silver. It doesn't matter. And we're transporting it back. And you can't, there's nothing worse than a thief who knows a thief, because they know each other's men. Drake lived in fear that he was going to be attacked by another pirate. Mm-hmm. And what do? Complain that the stuff you stole has been stolen from you? Doesn't work. Doesn't work. So, can't you imagine the kids on the street? Can't go home to mom and say he stole because I stole it from, no, that won't work. So we have the Brits, and they need to guarantee that all this pilfered goods can get back to the mother country. And that's the purpose of the British Navy. That's what evolves. This concept that it is there for the protection, this Spanish Armada thing. No. That would make it look like that the British Navy is there for defense. It makes it look like nothing is going to harm. We're going to protect. We're the No. It was protect, but it was protect the ill-gotten goods. What they called the ill-gotten booty or the ill-booten gotti or something like that. But it's that transport from out there home that we've got to guarantee. And that's where the British Navy says, okay, we need. And so as you saw, the shape of the ships changes, the style of the ships changes, and more importantly, something else changes, and that is the construction. In other words, the British are the first to play around with something called an iron ship. Now, the iron ship means we're not going to put up any wood. Well, so what? Wood is cheap. Wood you can shape. Wood you can work with. Iron, boy, that's hard. That's very hard to shape. It's also heavy, but it's very, very hard to put a cannonball through an iron ship. And the iron ship is born approximately the same time as the steam engine comes out. And so we're going to put the steam engine into an iron ship And this ship, it's a class of ship. It's not one ship, but it is. They're the first one. If you go to Bristol, it's sitting there. You can tour it. The very first iron ship. Of course, it was laughed at, everything else. Oh, you make it, you build it, you roll it down the way, and you hit the Bay of Bristol, and it's going to sink because it's made of steel or iron. Well, yeah, they didn't know a lot about it. They made some major mistakes. We've got this steel ship. And a steel ship, just if you remember the story, now we're approximately the same period of time here, because in the United States, they're playing around with steel ships. If I remember right, they called them the Monitor and the Merrimack, or the Monitor and the Virginia. 1860s, American Civil War. But that's the same time that my friend, a friend, can't say I ever met him, Isengard Kingdom Brunel. This is a man who had more brains than he was allowed. But he actually took his money that he had worked, he built the Great Western Railway, took the money from that, put it into the Great Western, which of course was his first ship, and he's sailing it back and forth to the colonies. And he sails it back because it is burning something. There is a limitation. Because it is burning coal, it has to have, it's not dependent on the wind. Because it's burning coal, it has to have the coal bins. And this drive is going to push our explorers, it's going to push our empire even more, because the boat ship can only go so far before it refuels. And so we have to have a coaling station at Gibraltar. We have to have a coaling station around the corner, give or take Monaco. We have to have another coaling station, maybe, Ivory Coast, somewhere in there. Then we have to have another coaling station down at South Tip, Cape Town, or maybe Johannesburg, down there somewhere. Then we got to have one in Madagascar. Then we got to have 8 days of coaling, 8 days of stop and refuel to get from Southampton to India. So what they gained in steel, they lost with the coal. All of a sudden, somebody figured it out. And that was something called fuel oil. And so here it is, the first real major use of fuel oil in a large tank to propel this large iron boat. Now, the only problem you got is when you get there, and Brunel had it, when you get to the States, where's the fuel oil? So he had to pick, and he had to come into, I remember, if I get this right, when he came over, he had to dock at Philadelphia because Philadelphia had access to the Pennsylvania oil fields. But early on, what did that teach? Early on, it taught the Brits that they needed the Middle East. They needed Saudi Arabia. They needed Palestine. And this is also, of course, why the Suez Canal is dug. Because if we go through there, we save time, we save energy. But if we put a station in there where we can refill, that's a big plus, and look where the oil is located. And so the British Navy, again, is going to lead the way. They're going to say, okay, we'll set up this port, we'll set up this station, we'll set up this docking, we'll do this, we'll do this. And in doing so, they set up the world for trade, which is the British Empire. Now, we won't get into the morals of the British Empire. It's done. It's dirty, it's underhanded, it's a lot of things. But that's what we've got. Now, what I'd like to do, Jonah, are you back there?
Yeah, I can hear you, Terry.
Let's roll that video for today.
Sounds good.
With the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, the Royal Navy established itself as a fleet with reach and strength. And now during the 17th and 18th centuries, her shipbuilding expertise and revolutionary strategies would make her ships an impenetrable force on the oceans of the world. Known as wooden walls, these formidable vessels had no equal in strategy and firepower, and redefined the way battles were fought and won. But the French, our longtime adversary, revealed weaknesses in her tactics that threatened to destroy Britain's seemingly endless success as ruler of the seas. Eventually, it would take a one-armed commander and a revolutionary plan of attack to reinvigorate her wooden walls. But the Royal Navy soon found that her fate, as well as an entire nation's, might hinge on a single shot.
In October of 1805, Admiral Horatio Nelson leads his fleet aboard HMS Victory, heading to sea in what will culminate in the most decisive encounter in the history of the Royal Navy, the Battle of Trafalgar. It will also signal a decisive change in the way the British fight at sea, a change from a plan of attack that had helped shape the Royal Navy into one of the most renowned military forces in the world. It was a tactical system that was conceived 2 centuries earlier. At the beginning of the 17th century, after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the new Stuart kings initially took little interest in their navy. But by 1640, Charles I had sustained a massive expansion program on the revenues of a highly unpopular tax. Ironically, as his battles with Parliament plunged England into civil war, his navy sided with Parliament, and in 1649, Charles was executed for treason. During the new Commonwealth period under Oliver Cromwell, England's need for renewed strength and security against royalists as well as hostile neighbors led to an even more powerful fleet.
There's no doubt that as we enter the 17th century and we get towards the mid-period of that, towards what we call the Commonwealth period in the United Kingdom, the possibilities of increased firepower and improved technology dawn on people. And we start seeing the ability to concentrate firepower in line of battle tactics. And that is typified by the sort of battles that we saw between the Dutch and the English between the 1650s and the 1660s.
During the early part of the 17th century, the Dutch were a major commercial force along the coastal regions of England. Adept at shipbuilding, the British saw there was a threat to their trade as well as their coastline and sought a way to reduce their presence. In 1651, England decreed that the Dutch should be limited in their access to English trade by a piece of legislation known as the Navigation Act.
The object of the Navigation Act is to increase the number of English seafarers so that the Navy will always have a good supply of sailors in time of war. It's also a way of attacking the economic success of the Dutch, Britain's main competitors at sea. And before the Navigation Act, the Dutch are carrying British goods from British ports to other British ports. This act cuts them out, says you can't do this. we are going to carry our own goods, and we're going to do it by law. And as a result, there will be more English sailors and more English ships. It's a critical attack on the economy of the Dutch Republic.
The Dutch didn't take the British declaration lightly. In 1652, the British Navy became locked in battle in what would be the first of 3 conflicts against the Dutch. However, the fighting that was to come would be vastly different from their previous clashes with the Spanish. For one, the British began to construct ships that were aimed at overpowering their enemy.
You start seeing the changes to building much more heavily built ships during the Dutch wars in the 17th century. You needed to build these ships very heavily, and it's primarily to do with our concept of how we operated our fleets. If you look at this hull, it's 300,000 cubic feet of timber in its construction. You need to have between you and the enemy a good barrier, a wall to defend yourself behind.
Known as England's wooden walls, these mighty ships were initially constructed in the dockyard of Chatham.
Chatham, a very exciting place. It's the birthplace of many of the ships in the Royal Navy. The Unicorn and the Victory, for example, are still in existence today, some of the oldest ships afloat, and they started their life in Chatham.
Founded in 1567, Chatham would eventually become the largest dockyard due to its location on the River Medway and its proximity to the Dutch.
Its dockyards, its arsenals, its vast victualling stores were specifically designed to combat the threat from the Dutch. And I think we can easily underestimate the threat from the Dutch in the 17th century. They were the leading trading power in Europe, and they looked set to become dominant on the seas.
Much to Oliver Cromwell's credit, he sought the help of experienced leaders such as generals of the sea Robert Blake and George Monk. Blake and Monk brilliantly brought to fruition a new strategy that would change the way naval battles were to be fought for centuries to come. Their ideas were codified in 1653 in a manual entitled The Fighting Instructions. Simply put, the fighting instructions directed that a fleet fight its engagements in a linear formation, so the British ships would face their enemies broadside to broadside.
The fighting instructions are developed to provide ground rules as to how the fleet should be conducted, to ensure that every captain understands what his job is. They're not the top end of the spectrum, they're the bottom end. That's the lowest level of competence you expect of your fleet, the ability to form and maintain a linear formation to engage the enemy with cannon.
From this point forward, English ships meant to fight in a fleet's main battle line were dubbed ships of the line.
Fleets designed to fight entirely using cannon, a linear battle fleet, broadside to broadside, and the more cannon you have, the stronger your ship will be. So the English invent first of all the gun-armed ship of the line, and the first of those typically for them is called the Sovereign of the Seas, to tell the rest of the world who's in charge.
Designed by a brilliant English shipwright named Phineas Pett, the Sovereign of the Seas was launched in 1637, well before linear tactics were codified in the fighting instructions. But her immense size and striking power made her the prototype for ships of the line for over 150 years. She was 232 feet long and weighed over 1,500 tons, making her by far the largest warship in the world. But her most impressive feature was her armament, 104 bronze cannon on 3 decks. Since ships of the line were not built to a standard set of specifications, the vessels were categorized by size and number of cannon. The largest ships of the line were termed first-raters.
A typical first rate would take between 3 and 5 years to build. They'd be built fairly slowly because they were intended to last for a long time, so the very structure of the ship had to be built steadily and allowed to mature as it was being constructed. And this would involve 3,000 or 4,000 tons of prime timber and the work of probably 1,000 men at various stages putting the thing together. So it's an enormous undertaking.
The Royal Navy was fully prepared to put their ships of the line to the test in the first battle of the Anglo-Dutch Wars between Blake and Dutch Admiral Martin Tromp. And in May of 1652, the British fleet sailed to meet the Dutch ships head-on, poised to hurl cannon fire at the enemy's hulls. And before the first blast from the first shot rang out, Blake knew the outcome of the battle and the war would forever change the face of England's Navy. Surrounded by the sea, with ongoing threats from the Dutch, French, and Spanish, England found herself forever defending her coast. But the primary region that needed to remain secure was along the English Channel. If an enemy could control this crucial waterway, its chances of winning any war with England were greatly increased.
There's no doubt that from the Roman Empire onwards, the continent of Europe was very much in the minds of the people who lived certainly on the south and east coasts of Britain, as it then was. And there grew up this assumption that the channel between Britain and Europe was something that was British. It's called today the English Channel. And you've got an amazing sort of continuity right through from almost Norman times, that any ship that goes through there goes through courtesy of the Brits.
The Dutch, more than any other country, were familiar with the English Channel and with the importance of seizing its control. But the English were equally experienced, and in 1652, Admiral Robert Blake sailed into the Channel to stop them. His opponent was the equally adept Dutch Admiral Martin Tromp.
Blake, of course, came to military service in the middle of his life after being a merchant and an MP. And after military service in the English Civil War, he then becomes a general at sea. And he takes to the sea his understanding of warfare and his understanding of the use of artillery. And he's the first modern admiral, the first admiral to use the ship as a gunnery platform, pure and simple, and to build a tactical system around firepower. His opponent in the First Dutch Wars, Tromp, is an admiral of the old school of dynamic tactics, of close action and boarding.
On May 19, 1652, just off the White Cliffs of Dover, Tromp ordered his captains to refrain from lowering their flags in salute to a squadron of English ships, as they were required to do under the Navigation Act. Blake fired a warning shot across Tromp's bow. Tromp's return fire ignited the first battle of the war and the initiation of the heavily armed wooden walls in battle. Blake's ships of the line and new tactics took Tromp completely by surprise, as artillery ripped into the Dutch ships. After losing 2 vessels and sensing the balance of power favored the British, the Dutch were forced to withdraw. Afterwards, Tromp and the Dutch Admiralty were forced to completely rethink their strategy.
The Dutch ships are still attempting or thinking in terms of fighting in a kind of disorganized melee. And the Dutch admirals go home and say to their leaders that we've got to adopt this formation fast, and we too have got to start building bigger, more powerful ships with heavy gun armament, and we too have got to fight in the line of battle, otherwise we simply aren't going to be able to survive.
In November of that same year, Tromp led 80 ships into battle against Blake's 40 ships of the line off Dungeness. Tromp's fleet battered Blake's, evening the score for the Dutch, and more significantly, placing the Channel in Dutch hands. However, their victory would be short-lived. No longer taking the Dutch Navy for granted, the English ships of the line redoubled their efforts, not only to regain control of the Channel, but to institute a strangling naval blockade of the Dutch coastline. Tromp was unwilling to surrender, believing he could still successfully engage the British in a Dutch-style melee. But on July 31, 1653, Tromp's tactics and fate were decided at the Battle of the Texel. Leading 100 ships in an attempt to break the British blockade, Tromp not only lost a decisive battle, he was killed in the onslaught. The Dutch fleet was shattered, and their government was forced to sign the Treaty of Westminster in April of 1654. The Dutch were required to repay the English for their losses and salute England's flag in British seas. The First Anglo-Dutch War was over. Ultimately, under Blake's overall leadership, the ships of the line and their new tactics simply overwhelmed the Dutch.
Admiral Blake ended up being our most aggressive, intuitive admiral, probably until the time of Nelson. Today, he's probably slightly neglected, but after Nelson, probably our most famous and deservingly famous admiral.
But the peace didn't last long. In 1658, Oliver Cromwell died. With no comparable leader to take his place, the Commonwealth collapsed and the monarchy was reestablished. In 1660, the period known as the Restoration began with the reign of Charles II. The Dutch continued to challenge England's supremacy in the trade lanes, while England conducted raids on Dutch colonies in North America and Africa. Finally, in March of 1665, a second war was officially declared. This time, however, the Dutch were better prepared. Without the leadership of Martin Tromp, the Dutch Admiralty turned to Michiel de Ruyter, who was appointed commander-in-chief of the Dutch fleets.
In all three of the Dutch wars, the best admiral was a Dutchman. In all three of the wars, the most dynamic tactical moves are made by the Dutch. The English are relying on bigger and heavier ships with more powerful guns and those famous fighting instructions for a line of battle to beat off the aggressive Dutch. And in most battles they manage this. In some they do it very well.
However, de Ruyter proved to be too strong an adversary. In the northern English Channel in June of 1666, in what would be known as the 4 Days' Battle, de Ruyter led 85 ships alongside George Monk's 60 in a classic line of battle. The Dutch fleet was overpowering. De Ruyter's triumph in this crucial contest gave the Dutch a momentum they would not soon relinquish. The final devastating blow to the Royal Navy would come in June of 1667. With the English ships docked in Chatham for a much-needed refit, the Admiralty felt the area was safe from attack. However, as the British were planning their next move, de Ruyter was already moving his ships up the River Medway to assault the unsuspecting British fleet and regain the advantage for his nation's navy at a single stroke. The River Medway, an anchorage in the Thames estuary near Chatham, seemed like a natural defense against invaders. The British believed the narrow channels of the river were too dangerous for an enemy to navigate in a surprise attack. In June of 1667, Dutch Admiral Michiel de Ruyter was determined to prove them wrong. With the help of a turncoat English pilot, de Ruyter led his forces up the River Medway. In a desperate attempt to stop the Dutch assault, the British sank several of their own ships to block the channel. It was a futile effort. The Dutch reached the undefended English ships and wreaked havoc among them. It was one of England's darkest hours, and one of the brightest for de Ruyter.
De Ruyter, of course, is the Dutchman every Englishman loves to hate because of his exploits in the Medway during Charles II's reign. Another man committed to the fight on behalf of his country.
De Ruyter's fleet had captured or destroyed 8 British vessels, including the pride of their fleet, the massive Royal Charles. Badly beaten, it was England's turn to sue for peace, signing the Treaty of Breda in July of 1667. It was an inauspicious beginning for Charles II's monarchy and a stain on the reputation of the Royal Navy. It also made glaringly apparent that the Navy was badly in need of reform. Oddly enough, the man responsible for this endeavor would be a landlubber, a famous diarist, Samuel Peeps.
He was passionately interested in the Royal Navy, and at a time of decline and underinvestment, Peeps sustained the idea of a navy organised on modern lines.
And it is that spark to change things at that time being that then developed into the Restoration period under King Charles II and the expansion of the Navy, with such people like Peeps behind it, who spent a lot of time reorganising and laid down basically the pattern of the Navy we have today.
Samuel Pepys was born on February 23, 1633 in London, to parents who were simple country folk with no distinct lineage. But by 1660, with hard work and the help of a rich and well-connected relative, he'd secured a position on the Navy Board under Charles II. In that same year, Pepys began to write an extensive diary. It was a diary he would secretly keep for 10 years, and it would become the most thorough record of the era. With little knowledge of the sea and ships, Pepys' determination and inquisitive mind brought him to the realization that the system by which the Navy was run was completely corrupt. He discovered thievery and deceit in the logbooks and among shipbuilders. He began his quest for turning the Royal Navy into a professional organization by setting a standard for purchasing and dispersing food.
He lays down basic accountancy rules for the purses of ships. He tries to stop fraudulent behaviour by contractors. He establishes the sort of rations that sailors should have. He realised very early the importance that sailors attached to their diet.
Peeps' reforms came at a crucial time in England's history. In the late 1660s, the Dutch became the leading economic country in Europe and were wary about other nations challenging their position. And no one was more anxious for war against the Dutch than King Louis XIV of France, who had now built his kingdom into a formidable power.
The power that everybody is frightened of, everybody admires, nobody can possibly ignore. And Louis XIV's France builds from scratch the biggest navy in the world. From almost nothing, in just over 20 years, they built the biggest navy in the world.
Although the British had previously signed an alliance with the Dutch in 1670, the French king was able to secretly convince Charles II to join forces in an anti-Dutch coalition. It was a decision that would prove to be a serious mistake. In 1672, England and France declared war on the Dutch. The Royal Navy would go to battle yet again in a third Anglo-Dutch war. However, the British found themselves pawns in a deadly deceit by the French, as 65 British ships and 36 French ships were anchored off Solebay. The Royal Navy's old enemy, Michael de Ruyter, sailed quickly into the perimeter and took the Allies by surprise. The battle raged for 14 hours. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but the results were inconclusive. Most importantly, in the Battle of Solebay and the two engagements that followed, the Royal Navy failed to receive adequate support from the French.
Both parties have reason to be extremely alarmed at what the French are doing. The Dutch, because Louis XIV was a declared enemy of theirs and in fact tried to invade and conquer them. The English, because Louis XIV is, well, an ally in fact, but also a rather obvious rival.
It was becoming clear that King Louis XIV had maneuvered the two strongest navies into fighting each other. However, his hopes of reducing their forces to clear the waters for the French ended when the British and the Dutch reached a peaceful agreement in 1674. Though the Dutch continued their fight with the French, the British were fortunate to bow out, but not before their fleets were once again depleted.
The three Anglo-Dutch wars of the 17th century demonstrate that England is capable of raising and deploying the most powerful battle fleet in Europe. They also demonstrate that, certainly in the Second and Third Wars, it can't afford to do this for more than 2 years at a time. And the English are bankrupt at the end of both the Second and the Third Anglo-Dutch wars, and their ability to fight at sea is seriously degraded by this.
Meanwhile, Samuel Pepys continued pursuing his goal of unifying the Navy into a disciplined fighting force. One significant change was terminating the practice of buying positions in the Navy. Officers were now required to earn their ranks. Further, in 1677, Pepys established examinations for lieutenants, especially in their knowledge of mathematics and navigation.
And this is the first time that well-born officers, as well as those who have been brought up in the sea tradition, have been tested as equals, and it sets a minimum standard which makes sure that the people at sea as officers are professionals before they move up the promotion ladder.
Pepys' reforms had begun to take hold, and for the first time the Royal Navy became a thoroughly professional organization.
Pepys is the first recognised civil servant of the modern style. He checks up in detail on the officers appointed to supervise the fleet and its supply train. He organises ships to go out and victual the warships at sea. This is the first time this is done on a systematic scale. And he lays down the rules and regulations for professional conduct at sea.
Pepys has one of those critical background roles. He doesn't win any battles, but he puts the equipment in place and the programs underway to build that fleet that wins the battles. Pepys is the administrative powerhouse of the Stuart Navy. He's the man that makes everything happen.
Pepys' reforms laid the foundation for a tradition of naval excellence that still exists to this day. His brilliant mind and the historical period he chronicled are preserved as national treasures in the Samuel Pepys Library at Magdalen College, Cambridge, home to his celebrated diary and volumes of books dedicated to the time when both a nation and its navy underwent radical reform.
Maybe the major oddity of the library consists of the diaries. They are the one set of personal documents They were carefully preserved in the library from the moment when he began to establish it.
For the next 150 years, Peeps' reforms and the wooden walls were repeatedly put to the test, most notably against their constant adversary, the French. As the British continued adhering to the fighting instructions, the French were carefully planning the means to break through England's wooden walls. In 1781, as blood from the American Revolutionary War continued to spill, English Rear Admiral Thomas Graves met French Admiral Francois de Grasse off the coast of Virginia. Graves signaled his ships to fall into a line of battle. What happened next forced the Royal Navy to rethink their entire strategy of engagement. In the late 17th century, as the French built up their fleet with the express purpose of outmatching England, the Royal Navy was taking its own steps to exploit every edge in battle. And one way was by educating the Navy in the science of navigation. It was a program that began with Charles II and Samuel Pepys.
From the time that Charles II establishes the Royal Observatory, the critical role is navigation at sea for the Navy and for the other great arm of British strength, the merchant marine. The ability to trade with the rest of the world over seas commanded by the Royal Navy is critical. But you can't use those seas as a highway until you can navigate them safely. And throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the steady development of navigational science in Britain is all about the practical exploitation of the sea.
And Pepys himself was important here because he was the first person to insist on examinations for the Navy. And those examinations were all to do with navigation.
The difficulty was longitude. It was determined that by utilizing a clock on board ship, calibrated to the known time at the longitude in England, and with regular observations of the sun, sailors could pinpoint their longitude anywhere in the world. There was only one problem. The pendulum clocks of the day were not reliable enough to keep accurate time through the variable conditions at sea. A self-taught clockmaker with a genius for mechanical devices decided to solve the problem. His name was John Harrison.
Well, Harrison, of course, spent 26 years of his life pursuing this question of a stable time reference because he'd recognized that it was the key to the understanding of longitude.
Harrison painstakingly designed and constructed 3 innovative timepieces, H1, H2, and H3. Each had problems, however, not the least of which were their relatively large size and extreme complexity. Then, in 1759, he built a revolutionary timepiece called the H4. It could be held in the palm of the hand, yet was accurate to within 2.5 seconds per month.
These 4 clocks, which were successively smaller, more easy to transport, each very sophisticated in its own way, and they're stunning to look at, each produced with virtually no equipment or tools that we'd recognize today for precision work of that nature, and they are a marvel.
Harrison's invention, later dubbed a chronometer, gave the Royal Navy a tremendous edge against the French. It was an edge that was needed time and time again as the British found themselves fighting their old enemies for the better part of a century. In a battle that would prove the weaknesses in the fighting instructions, the French, led by Admiral Francois de Grasse, deployed ships to aid the Americans in the Revolutionary War. These vessels were the culmination of French Secretary of State Jean-Baptiste Colbert's naval reforms to build faster and more maneuverable vessels than the British. In August of 1781, de Grasse was met by English Rear Admiral Thomas Graves off Chesapeake Bay near Yorktown, Virginia, where General George Washington and America's French allies under General Rochambeau were besieging a British army under Lord Cornwallis. As Graves spent valuable time forming the line as set forth by the fighting instructions, de Grasse attacked, firing high to disable the English ship's sails and rigging.
With wooden warships, the greatest danger on board the ship is that the enemy's shot punches through the hull of the ship and drives huge oak splinters across the gun deck, and these will cut down the gun crew and do tremendous damage. The French system was generally to fire up into the rigging to try and disable the enemy so they could escape and carry out their mission. The British system was to fire into the enemy's hull and to kill the enemy's crew so the ship would be taken.
De Grasse then used the superior speed of his ships to lead Graves on a 6-day hit-and-run chase in the Atlantic. Though only one English ship of the line was sunk during the engagement, the British fleet was drawn away from Yorktown. With no naval support, Cornwallis was overwhelmed by the French and American armies. De Grasse's strategy had allowed General Washington to win the decisive battle of the Revolutionary War. The linear tactics that had served the Royal Navy so well since the Anglo-Dutch Wars were demonstrating their limitations. Then in 1782, a Scottish landlubber named John Clark penned an essay on naval tactics. In it, he examined the weaknesses of linear tactics and proposed new radical methods of attacking the enemy at sea. Rather than simply lining up in the traditional fashion, the ships would maneuver to charge the enemy at its weakest point.
In many ways, the work of Clark of Eldon provides a reflection on the tactical system from the side. It's not a naval officer saying we can do better than this. It's an Edinburgh man sitting on the shore thinking, I'm sure they can do better than this, and here's some ideas. It's a work that inspires thought.
One British admiral inspired by Clark was George Bridges Rodney. In April of 1782, Rodney's fleet of 35 happened upon French Admiral Francois de Grasse's 33 ships, escorting a convoy in the West Indies. Once again, de Grasse led the British on a chase. However, after 4 days, Rodney cornered de Grasse against a group of islets called the Saints, pressing the French admiral into battle. Rodney wasted no time implementing Clark's theories. He captured 5 ships, a stunning accomplishment for the time. Admiral de Grasse became his prisoner as well.
The Navy's problems in the Revolutionary War stem essentially from faulty strategy. Instead of taking control of European waters and pinning the French down, they pursued the French around the world, they pursued various strategic options, and it was only really in 1782 when they achieved a superior concentration of force at a decisive point in the West Indies that they finally brought the French to battle and defeated them.
Yet despite its victory at the Saints, there were still problems in the Royal Navy. In 1797, the British were fending off French fleets in the shadow of the French Revolution. But furious because their pay hadn't been raised in over a century and now stood at less than half that of merchant seamen, British sailors in the ships anchored at both Portsmouth and the East Coast defied orders from their captains and refused to set sail to face the French fleet.
The fleet would have gone to sea if the French had come out, but the men in the fleet knew very well that the French not only weren't coming, but couldn't. The French fleet at that moment was unmanned and not prepared for sea, so they knew they had a window of opportunity to conduct what was a straightforward economic trade dispute.
After over a month of tense negotiations, the British government granted its seamen a 23% pay increase and a royal pardon for their actions. But despite the problems the Royal Navy encountered, it was during this era of almost constant battle engagements that a foundation of experience was laid that would prepare it for one of the greatest periods in its history.
It's the teething ground of which prepared the Navy for the final battles for the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. And this is how we became to have this professional group that was able to withstand anything that was thrown at it during the period 1793 to 1815.
It was also a period in which England was in desperate need of commanders who could lead the Royal Navy to victories that would, once and for all, end any thought of going up against her wooden walls. As Napoleon Bonaparte sought European domination, the daring young British admiral would challenge his navy's traditional battle plans, and in so doing, fight its greatest battle and become his nation's greatest hero. On May 7th, 1765, a magnificent new ship of the line was launched at the Chatham dockyards. Her name was HMS Victory. It was a name that would prove to be prophetic, not just for battle, but for an entire nation.
The Victory is an example of the mid to late 18th century first-class fighting ship, the first-rate three-decked line of battle ship. The Victory tells you that the Royal Navy is a battle fleet, not a fleet designed for other kinds of warfare. It's designed to fight full-scale battles against the best the enemy can offer. And the Victory, both by her name and by her design, is the flagship of a great fleet to fight the enemy to secure command of the sea.
But a ship's true strength could only be realized by its commander and crew. Fortunately for the Victory and for King George III, during their most crucial times, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson was in command. Born in 1758, Nelson began his naval career at the age of 12 as an apprentice. Remarkably, before the age of 21, he was given command of a frigate. But Nelson's life at sea was not always smooth. In 1794, during the siege of Calvi, he was wounded and lost sight in his right eye. In 1797, in an attack on Santa Cruz de Tenerife, he lost his right arm when it was shattered by a musket ball. But Nelson's bravery and aspirations never wavered, and he quickly rose to the rank of Vice Admiral. A respected commander, Nelson had the good fortune of serving in the Royal Navy following a century of reform.
A lot of development have been going on. A lot of people have been trying out new ideas. Nelson was the heir of generations of intelligent admirals who had attacked some of the tactical problems of handling ships of the line and had developed various solutions. The striking thing about him is that he was strikingly flexible and eclectic, and he took further than any British admiral had done before him a style of command which involved delegation and trusting his subordinates. A lot of admirals found it very difficult to delegate. Some indeed found it psychologically quite impossible.
He's probably the most situationally aware admiral that we have had in our history. He was a great reader of scenes and then how to exploit those to his advantage. He then let loose, basically, what was a navy that knew what it was doing in detail.
Nelson's intelligence, bravery, and leadership served him extraordinarily well throughout his career, and never was this more apparent than during the Napoleonic War at the Battle of Trafalgar. At the time, Napoleon Bonaparte was leading France and their ally Spain in a war against England. If the Franco-Spanish fleet could defeat the Royal Navy, it would clear the way for Napoleon to unleash an invasion of Britain. On the morning of October 21st, 1805, off the Cape of Trafalgar on the Spanish coast, the importance of the moment was very much on Admiral Nelson's mind as he prepared his fleet of 27 ships of the line to attack the Franco-Spanish fleet of 33. Nelson ordered signal flags raised that read, "England expects that every man will do his duty."
When it went to the top of the masts, his second-in-command, Cuthbert Collingwood, said, "Why is Nelson sending us this signal? We know our duty." But Collingwood understood when all the fleet started to cheer that Nelson had tapped into that great vein of emotion which cooler men like Collingwood never could reach.
Nelson's battle plan was simple, yet brilliant. Drawing on the ideas of John Clark and the experiences of Admiral Rodney, he would split his fleet into two columns. He would then order them to steer head-on into the French and Spanish line, cutting the enemy into three segments. Due to the direction of the wind, the first segment would only be able to continue north, essentially leaving the battle to be fought by the rest of the line, which would now be badly outnumbered by the British. As the British column slowly moved toward the Franco-Spanish line at a speed of barely 3 knots, each commander had time to ponder his role in the upcoming battle.
At the Battle of Trafalgar, a very interesting incident occurs. As the British fleet is approaching the French and Spanish fleet, the captain of the French ship, Redoutable, can see which his opposite number is going to be. He can see it's going to be the Victory. And he sees that Victory vastly outguns him. So, being a man of initiative, he thinks, well, how best can I avoid that opening cannonade? So he takes a lot of his sailors out of the hull, away from the guns, puts them in the rigging and forms them up as boarding parties on his upper deck.
Once the battle is joined, the Redoutable is raked by devastating cannon fire from the Victory. The French boarding parties are unable to assault Nelson's ship. But in the rigging, the French sharpshooters are able to sweep Victory's decks. As he stands in full view and commands the battle, one of their musket balls strikes Nelson. The British ships of the line fire broadside after broadside, pounding away at the remaining ships that Nelson had so brilliantly cut away from the rest of their fleet. In the end, 19 of the enemy's 33 ships of the line were either destroyed or captured. Trafalgar is a spectacular, devastating melee.
Trafalgar is the last major sea battle of the Napoleonic Wars. It's the last time the French dare to send a full-size fleet out to sea. It's the last time they have the ambition to try and change the balance of power at sea. And the fact that that fleet is annihilated by the British means that their chances of winning the war against Britain through invasion have finally come to an end.
Sadly, Trafalgar was not without tragedy for the English. Nelson died a few hours after being told of his smashing triumph. As word of his death spread through the fleet, shock and sorrow were overwhelming. Nelson's body was carried home on his battered ship Victory for a state funeral the likes of which England had never seen, before or since.
Huge numbers of people weeping in the streets for somebody they never met. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. It will be extraordinary even today when we have mass means of communication which give us the illusion of knowing people whom we have never met personally. But none of those existed in the 18th century, and yet the sort of magnetism of Nelson's personality reached out and touched people of all classes in an extraordinary way.
The Battle of Trafalgar made Horatio Nelson the most celebrated admiral in the long history of the Royal Navy. His genius as a leader transcends time to reach deep into the hearts of naval officers.
I think being a modern naval officer, you bear a terrific burden. You have all these famous people looking over your shoulder, making sure you're doing the right thing. And certainly the modern naval officer still has the spirit of Nelson in his mind, the spirit of aggression, the spirit of getting at the enemy.
Nelson is two things. Nelson is the greatest naval leader of all, and his tactics at Trafalgar and at all his other battles show an elegant simplicity and a command of the full range of naval warfare which no other commander, I think, in history has ever matched. But also he's the first and quite the most spectacular national hero. He is the man that holds the country together in its darkest hour when invasion is threatened, when the enemy seem to be winning all the other battles everywhere else. Nelson is the talisman of victory. So even after he's dead, he has to be brought back and put into the national pantheon, and he remains as a godlike figure for the next century to justify Britain's view of itself in the world.
The spirit of Nelson isn't all that survives from this great period in naval history. Today, HMS Victory is carefully preserved and maintained in Portsmouth, England. Rich in history and breathtaking in stature, she is a monument to a pivotal era for the Royal Navy. Like the many officers and ships that came before them, Nelson and Victory do not merely represent revered memories of glories past. They continue to live and breathe as national treasures in the storied traditions that created the legends of the Royal Navy's great wooden walls.
Blake's cunning skill against the Dutch and Nelson's victory at Trafalgar prove that it's not only large ships and numbers and size of weapons that win battles, but the strategy and courage behind them. The tragedy of Trafalgar was the death of Nelson himself. This is where he was standing, and this is the musket ball that killed him. As shipbuilders began to look to new materials and new technology, the glorious days of the wooden walls would soon fade over the horizon, and the awesome, resilient ships of steel, steam, and unimaginable firepower would forever change the course of the Royal Navy and war at sea.
Very good, very good. Now we're all back again. Guess. Okay, well, look, didn't lose too many. Fran even woke up. Okay. I want to read, if I can do this here, see how coordinated I am. I want to read this. And if you think that there aren't characters, huh? In 1801 was also the year in which Nelson destroyed the Danish navy at the Battle of Copenhagen. During the battle, he sent a signal to break off action, or he was sent a signal to break off action by the Admiral Sir Hyde Parker. Nelson reputedly put his telescope to his blind eye and said to his flag lieutenant, "You know, Foley, I have only one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes. I really do not see the signal." That's Nelson. And if you want to visit him, you may. He's standing on top of a column in a place called Trafalgar Square in what a lot of people like to call downtown London. It's not. Technically, it's out of the old city of London, but Trafalgar Square is, so to speak, just up the road a piece from Parliament. And if you're in a mind, it's very near the West End where most of the theaters are at. So that's where he resides today. Excuse me, that didn't sound well. Didn't sound good, I'm betting. So what does this leave us with? Where are we at? What's happening? What's going down? Nelson is, as you can see, one of the last of the wooden ship admirals, one of the last. And in doing so, his heritage then, or his what he passes along, isn't so much tactics. And that's not why he's, so to speak, up on that pole in Trafalgar Square. It is the fact that we've got a man with one arm, blind in one eye, who's an admiral and who is leading. This is what you and I would call the British spirit. This is the spirit that Churchill, so to speak, used when he thumbed his nose at the Luftwaffe. This is the stubbornness. This is the dedication to duty. And if anybody anywhere is responsible for fueling this, for starting it, it was about this much of that presentation. But this dedication to duty that Nelson exposes, expresses, practices, demonstrates. This is what Nelson's contribution to the British spirit is all about. I don't know that, without going into a major dissertation on Nelson, I don't know that we can go a lot further than that. I think what I'd like to do, if you are out there and you want to, are there questions? Are there things that we can fill in, or are you comfortable, or help me out? You got to unmute though if you're going to do it.
How long did Nelson live? He must have been an old man when he was in the Navy too. I mean,
Nelson Nelson was born in 1758.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like 1708 or something.
No, 1758.
Okay.
And of course,
That explains. Yeah.
17, yeah. So he's 58, so that makes him 40 when he's maybe October 1805. So,
Yeah.
50.
Okay. He was a lot young. I thought he was much older. Okay.
He is a loose cannon in many ways. Yes, he was married, but that didn't have much effect on him. It didn't slow him down. He had a relationship with Emma Hamilton. Get the name right. Emma and he openly flaunted the fact that they had a child. It was no big deal. He had a wife and she had a husband, but she also had a reputation. And if anything, we've got Nelson here. Yeah, let me do that so I don't. Nelson is a person who becomes devoted to his daughter, but he casts off the woman, Hamilton. He casts her off. He's going to go find another one, and because of it, in the upper, shall we say, how do I do this nicely? In the hoity-toities up here who like to hold themselves up as this is the way you should be and not the way you are, he was frowned upon. So in the upper levels of the Admiralty, he was frowned upon for his moral standards. In the lower levels, he was an inspiration to all of the men who fought with him, even on other ships, and that includes the captains of the other ships. That doesn't necessarily justify he and a lot of other things, but it helps to underscore that he is, in his own right, he is a character. He is going to do it his own way. I didn't see the signal, I didn't see the signal. I had the telescope up to my blind eye. Come on. This is just one, shall we say, of the characters, but this man is outstanding because of his motivational aura that he passes along. Anything? What else? What else?
Yeah.
Everybody else is asleep?
I have one question about Prince Andrew. Is he have a high rank in the British Navy, or why did they choose him to do this?
Well, Charles is too high, and up until about a year ago, when everything hit the fan, Andrew did keep his naval commission, and Edward, of course, he dropped it all and said, we're going to go it on our own. So he really was the only one left. They could have gone the next generation. They could have gone with William. They could have gone with Harry. But in this particular instance, they picked the royal family's best naval representative, because it wasn't until all this stuff hit the fan here for Andrew that he ended up cutting ties with, almost every group that he was involved with.
So all of the royal family had some kind of a rank in the Navy. Is that correct?
They've all served, and they all went in as officers. And when you go in as an officer, I know even here in the United States, once you're an officer, you can always be called back. So in that respect, you could call Charles back if you want to, but I'm not sure you want to at 72 years old. So no, that's what we're after, and that's what they're saying here. Now, the product or the package, the History Channel package, this is not a real new piece. This is probably about maybe 12 years old, this package. And in doing so, we've got to look at where he was 10 years ago when they asked him. And that would have put him in front of all of the nastiness.
Well, I don't know what you mean by nastiness. Like, he got divorced or something?
Oh no, not just that. No, he's been pulled into some underage sex and a few other things. This this guy in New York, he died in prison.
Epstein.
Epstein, yes.
Yes.
He was involved.
It's
been set, and there are photographs of the two of them together. And they're trying to prove a lot of things. They're trying to prove that Epstein's girlfriend was a very, very fancy madam who set up young girls, and supposedly Andrew had even while he was married to Fergie, he was having an affair, just having nights that Epstein would set up with young girls, and I mean young. So, what happened was it hit the fan in British tabloid media, and the royal family stepped up. The Queen stepped up and said, "You go stand in a closet." And they put Andrew in a closet, and you just don't hear about Andrew anymore. You may see pictures of him with mommy. He did attend his daughter's wedding, but he could not say anything. You could not interview him. You couldn't ask him anything. When the wedding ceremony was over, he had to go back to his closet.
But prior to that, Terry, he did interview, and there was a complete lack of acknowledgement that he did something wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what the British people resented highly.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm here, you're there, I don't care.
Exactly.
His royal noblesse oblige.
Very definite. Very definite. And so, maybe he deserved the closet. maybe he deserved to be put in a closet and this door slammed on him. His whole life is a very different life than Charles or any of the others. All of the stories that you hear about Fergie when they were together and then when they were separated and this, that, and the other. The bottom line on this is he lives in the left half of the house. She lives in the right half of the house, and the two girls used to go back and forth between the left half and the right half. Now one of them's married, and so it's not quite the same. but it's a real different situation than you and I are familiar with. But it does come down to, as Carolina said, there's an arrogance there.
Yeah.
And I have rights. No, I don't know that right. I take liberties that you can't have because I am who I am. But in this case, and I'm not usually pro-British tabloid media, but in this case, maybe the tabloid media got it right.
It came off as an unfeeling, insensitive plot.
Insensitive. That's an understatement.
To put it mildly.
Yes, yes. Everybody's sleeping.
So what do we have next week?
Well, next week we got to finish this up because we're right on top of.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is we're just going to take it through, and I'm going to probably spend a little bit of time. I feel I almost have to. We'll touch a little bit of time on where it has. It's kind of okay. It's gone from a surface navy to a submarine navy.
Mm.
Most of the British Navy today is not above the water, and it's all hiding out of Scotland, Scapa Flow.
Ah.
And that changes everything. Together with, they got caught not too long ago down in down Argentina way, around the Falklands, and they got into some pretty heavy stuff down there. And did the Navy step forward? Did the Navy do what it should have? What has happened to the image? And if it's the image, is it also the usability? It has been said that the British Navy at one time was second only to the United States. Now they say, well, maybe it's number 3, maybe it's number 4. It's not what it used to be, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we got to kind of wrap it up and move on.
Are you going to address World War II and the British Navy's role?
Well, we're going to have to do it a little bit, but I don't want to spend a lot of time. The piece that we've got, the recorded piece, will run up to that to a certain degree. They'll talk World War I and World War II, okay. The recorded piece. So I'll try and do what it doesn't do. In other words, I'll try and finish it off. I'll do the very end, okay. Time-wise, or the very current. Okay.
Harry?
Yes.
I was going to say, if anybody has a chance to go see the Victory, it is awesome.
Yes.
And the fact that there is so little room, and there are over 800 people on board.
Yes, yes.
Fighting trim, and you don't know where they all fit. It's a great display.
And when they fired the cannon down underneath the decks, they had to fire one side and then the other side so the people can get out of the way and not get crushed with the recoil of the cannon.
Right, and the smoke was so bad you could hardly see.
Yes. Yes. No, I was not. I didn't get to the Victory. I got to the Cutty Sark in Greenwich.
That's a great display too.
Yeah. Oh, we had fun that day on the Cutty.
Well, since they redid it, you can now actually you can have lunch underneath it.
Yes, now that they've taken it out of the
right
in dry dock, so to speak.
Oh. Where's it located?
Which one?
Greenwich.
Greenwich.
Cutty is at Greenwich, and the other one's at Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Victory. And the Hind is Plymouth, I think.
I don't know, but the Mary Rose is down at Portsmouth too.
Portsmouth, yes.
Really worth seeing the remains of that ship.
Remember too, Portsmouth. You've got there's the Isle of Wight is sitting down there all by itself, but what it is, it's the cork in the bottle, because north of it is the island itself and the river, which is all the naval yards, and then to get to it, you got to go around this island.
Right.
So you've got a natural protected harbor, which is why Portsmouth is so important, or has been so important, to the British Navy.
Okay.
So if you're looking, that's where it's at.
Okay.
If you've got nothing more, we're going to call it a day.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Terry.
Terry,
right.
one last thing. Did
Yes.
you send us handouts? Because I didn't get a handout, I don't think.
Oh, I don't know.
I was supposed to, but I think I forgot.
No, uh-oh. The
I'll send those right now.
The confessions are coming forward.
See you next week.